most people live two lives. There's the life you actually live, and then there's the unlived life inside you. But most people try to write out of that life they live instead of the unlived life inside them. Pay attention to that unlived life, like jump into that unlived life inside you, which I believe is the ultimate frontier of creativity.
Today, we're diving into the heart of storytelling and the art of finding your own voice in a crowded world. Have you ever wondered what makes a story not just heard, but felt? Or how a narrative can change the course of our lives even when the storyteller remains unseen? In the spotlight today is none other than Brent Cole, the mastermind behind Invisible Ink, a pinnacle of creativity in the ghostwriting universe since 2001. Brent isn't just any writer. He is a visionary whose ink has crafted over 50 books, and get this, sold over 25 million copies worldwide, and includes 12, count them, 12 New York Times bestsellers. From the corridors of the World Economic Forum to the halls of the Vatican, his words have echoed, earning accolades from country leaders and marking his presence on global stages like One.org. With a clientele spanning celebrities, thought leaders, athletes from the NFL to the NBA, Brent's ability to distill essence into words has made him a luminary in literary circles. But if you've never heard of him, that makes sense because it's what makes him a great ghostwriter. Brent just filmed with us at LeaderPass Studios and has his new course coming out very soon called DISTILL, Own What You Know. I love that. So, if you're on a quest to uncover your message, to weave your personal journey into a tapestry that resonates with others universally, today's conversation with Brent Cole is your guide through the labyrinth of storytelling. So get ready to be inspired, to find your voice, and perhaps discover the powers of the stories untold within you. Join us as we unravel the secrets of a ghostwriting titan and learn how you too can leave an indelible mark on the world of words. So Brent, let's tell me the story, or walk me through when you first came here, because I know weren't you in California?
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know, did you work for John Maxwell then at the church, or what happened there? And then when y'all moved here, because I think you said you moved over when they moved the entire organization.
Yeah. So no, I didn't work with John at his church. Was from San Diego, grew up in San Diego. His church was one of the bigger churches there. I actually was affiliated with David Jeremiah's church, which is kind of another big church there. I ended up meeting a friend that we share and ended up working for Maxwell in San Diego, his company.
Okay, gotcha.
His company in San Diego. And then 6 months in, the message was very clear. We are moving to Atlanta, and you have two choices. You can keep your job and move with the company, or you can find another job and stay in San Diego.
Okay.
So, and the company wasn't I think there was probably 60 employees at the time, maybe 50, something like that. I could be wrong, but I feel like it was, a few dozen. And I think just as a testimony to his leadership and the culture of that company, I want to say like over 80% of the people moved. And most of these people were native San Diegans, like me. But yeah, moved and lived in Atlanta, thereabouts. A little north of here, and worked for him for 3 years there.
And what did you do? Were you in the writing area or arena, or just kind of then?
So I worked for him for 5 years total, I think. But for the first year and a half to 2 years, traveled with him. I was one of the original, we called it SEMOps, Seminar Operations team.
Yeah.
At the time, we just went everywhere John went. It was we all had kind of different roles. There was the product side of things, getting merch there. There was the details like everywhere John needs to be. There was the audience. There was recruiting people to help volunteer to help, with merch, to help set up, to help tear down, all that stuff. Mm-hmm. And at the time, John was doing big events. John was doing 2 events. One was a church leadership event or faith-based leadership event. The other one was kind of a business leadership event. And they were anywhere from 2,000 to maybe 4,000 people at these events. So these were not small events. They were big events. We had our core team. I want to say it was maybe 6 to 8 people that worked for the company, and then we would recruit anywhere from a dozen to 20 volunteers at the venue, wherever it was. And most of the venues back then I don't know that it was cost effective to go rent like a basketball arena or something like that. Most of the venues back then were just in big churches.
Okay.
Even if it was a business leadership event, the church was the host site, and it usually seated 2, 3, 4,000 people, and that was kind of the goal. And so I did that for 2 years, and we were on the road 150, 200 days a year. I was young, 23, 24 years old. Got to see the country, which was fun. Didn't have, frankly, the best budget constraints back then. The company would probably say that. So we were eating at really nice restaurants, staying at probably far nicer hotels than we should have been staying in. But it was fun. It was a really cool community. That's cool. And more than anything else, got to know John's content, got to know leadership really, really well. One of my main roles was being in charge of the products that would be at the events. So I'm looking at who's the audience of this event, similar actually to what I'm doing now, but looking at the audience, who's in the audience, what type of person is this, demographic, psychographic, history, any history with them, and then pairing what products we would have at that event, for sale for those people.
That's great. And that was kind of your intro into, take me through that role, and then maybe a plane trip. I remember 5 years ago you told me the story, which was awesome. And it's kind of your intro into writing and what you even do.
Yeah. So I got into writing like most people get into writing. I was pre-med in college. That was like my, which obviously isn't the way people get into writing. But I had just an interest in writing, let's just say. I had a speech teacher in college tell me I had a natural ability in it, and I kind of held on to that, not as a career. Keep in mind I'm from Southern California, so I'm not, I know the story of moving to LA and waiting tables and, trying to break into the industry, and I was like, I'm not doing that. I actually had friends at the time that had already moved to LA, so I wasn't doing that. Writing was a hobby at the time for me. So as I'm, traveling with John and the team, going to all the events he's doing, one of the things I did a lot of as a hobby, I wrote, but nothing, I wasn't seeing it as a career. It was just something I enjoyed. One of the things I did to sort of supplement writing was I read all the time. I liked reading to sort of learn different styles and I was reading for enjoyment too, but I definitely was trying to read well-written books. So looking at bestseller lists, that kind of thing. Who recommended what. And so John came up to me on a plane. This is year 2 of traveling with him. So we had been around each other a lot, knew each other pretty well. I had seen all his stuff, knew all his stuff he talked about, knew all his, all the content in his books. And he came up to me and said, this is before the plane took off. One of his habits that he would do is he would walk up and down the aisles before the plane took off, wherever we were in whatever city we were in. And he would talk to his team that was on the plane. There's anywhere from, 6 or 7 of us to a dozen of us from the home office. And he just talked to us and asked, how we're doing and asked how, the event went for them and that kind of thing. So he came up to me and we were talking about, whatever, the event probably. And he said, hey, I noticed you read, I think I was reading at the time he came up. I noticed you read all the time. Is there something to that? Do you like a particular type of book? Are you trying to learn about a particular topic? Kind of just a pretty intuitive question, actually. And I don't know why I answered this way. To this day, I have no idea why I answered this way. It's a weird answer to the question, but I said, John, I think I read all the time because I like to write, and I like to see how other people communicate their ideas through writing. And his reaction was just, I didn't know you liked to, I didn't know you wrote. I didn't know you liked to write. I have a chapter of a book I'm working on right now that's printed out with me in my briefcase. Do you mind if I give it to you and you give me some feedback on the flight?
That's cool.
Yeah. So I said, yeah, of course, no problem. So he goes back to his seat, brings me this printout of 15 pages or whatever it was, and I read it on the flight and wrote some stuff in the margins. To this day, no idea what I wrote, no idea if it was good feedback, maybe it was bad, I don't know. I imagine it was probably halfway decent because it triggered something in him to think that I had an ability. About maybe a week or 2 later, his senior writer, who I think, if I'm not mistaken, is still writing for him today, Charlie, reached out to me and said, hey, John's been looking for a second writer for about 6 months. He thinks you're it. You need to go through the interview process, and like anybody else in the company.
So it must have been good. What you wrote must have been good enough to go.
I mean, the funny thing was, I didn't write anything really. I mean, I know you're not saying that. Yeah, I was commenting on what was written. He probably just saw a sort of an intuitive editorial eye in terms of what was good content and what wasn't. And it was obviously well written. Charlie had written it in collaboration with John, so it was well thought out, well written, entertaining, all the things that John's books are. I think I probably just saw a couple areas that I thought could be a little bit better, maybe. I mean, which sounds ridiculous to say as a 24-year-old who has zero experience in writing. But as a reader, you kind of, if you're reading with an editorial eye, you're thinking, oh man, that would have been so much better if it was down here. So it's probably something like that. But all that, fast forward to about maybe 30 days later. I don't remember exactly how long the span was, but probably a month later, I moved over from being on the seminar operations team to being John's second writer. So I was the junior writer, which primarily at the time meant I did all the research. There were some, content pieces that I would write, anecdotes, story, that kind of thing, research pieces. But I was by no means writing whole books at that point, not yet. Started off really just kind of get my feet wet, and Charlie was kind of a mentor to me then, and had to coach me a little bit, like if you don't get this done, you may not get the next project. That kind of hard, tough love kind of stuff.
Sure.
But it was amazing opportunity. One that I think at the time I didn't even realize how big it was.
Right.
Because what ended up happening is that that chapter that he gave me on the plane was for a book called 21 Irrefutable Laws of Leadership, which most listeners will probably know that book. I'm not positive, but I think it's sold between 9 and 10 million copies now. It just continues to sell. It's just a classic. It's one of those books that people refer back to. It's this is 25 years ago now that it came out. 98, 99. But what ended up happening is that my association with that book gave me some acclaim and credibility that frankly I didn't deserve. I mean, I did the research for the book. I maybe wrote, I don't know, 5 pages, 10 pages in the whole thing. I mean, there wasn't a whole lot I wrote in that. I did a lot of the research. If not a lot of it, I don't remember. But because of the success of that book, what ended up happening is that obviously John blew up. His acclaim grew greatly. His audiences got bigger. His circle of friends became more well known. And in that circle of friends, those who learned that John had 2 writers, and that one of them was this young guy who sort of was just learning the trade, but to whom they assigned this credibility that I frankly didn't deserve yet. I would get an email from one of them about every 3 months, and this is over the span of 3 years. This happened multiple times. Probably every 3 to 4 months, I get an email. They all started the same. They'd all say, "Don't tell John I'm emailing you, but da da da."
Really?
And they were all trying to recruit me to become the senior writer for them.
Okay.
So eventually, I took one of those opportunities. This is year 5 of being with John. 3 of them writing, 2 of them traveling, roughly. And took one of those opportunities. And instead of going on staff with that person, I decided I'm gonna form an S corp. I'm gonna form a company.
Okay.
They can pay me as a vendor contractor. That'll allow me to do other projects as long as it doesn't interfere with what I'm required to do for this person. Which again, like I don't know who was coaching me back then. It was a smart move. Probably Kevin. But somebody was giving me some good advice. I don't know why I did it that way, but that was sort of the birth of Invisible Ink back in 2000. I think it was the very beginning of 2001, and the 2 things happened then. It was very fortunate that I started working for John in a sort of a staff role, because it sort of removed any aspiration to have my name on books, because I didn't have the option with John. I might have been in the acknowledgments as, thanks to my researcher, thanks to my editorial assistant, whatever. He called me like 5 different names. But I just had, I'm kind of a behind the scenes guy anyways, but I had no desire to have my name. I was like, I don't know what the point. Nobody knows who I am. So if my name's on the book, it's neat for me, but my parents, but really nobody else. So because of that, I don't think I ever really got sort of pigeonholed into one style or genre of book.
Okay.
And that over time really allowed me to sort of write in a lot of different, all nonfiction, but a lot of different areas on a lot of different topics,
Yep.
which suits me because I don't know if I had to pick one that I would be able to.
Yeah, you're interested in a lot of things.
Yeah.
I want to go back to what you named your business, which I love. I love the name Invisible Ink.
Yeah.
And is that why? Is that the concept of ghostwriting and that you're behind the scenes? Is that why you did it?
Yeah. It's the sort of the natural inclination is to think that, it's invisible ink, ghostwriter, ghosts are invisible, this writing's invisible, whatever. That's one reason. That was sort of the reason I thought of it. Ultimately, and I had a couple different options. Ultimately, I went with that name because I realized what it is that I do is I am trying to find these, let's just say, invisible themes or invisible threads within this person's expertise, within their stories, and I'm trying to bring those to life. And we may not ever name them, name them by title, name them by topic. But my job as a ghostwriter is to try to figure out what those things are, the most potent pieces of content, the most potent topics, the most potent stories, bring those to life so that author that I'm working with can connect to the biggest audience out there. That was sort of the birth of the DISTILL stuff, although I didn't know it then. But that was certainly why Invisible Ink. When I realized that's what I do, that's what I love to do, and I don't have to talk about it. We don't even have to say the things I'm thinking, but I'm doing this, bringing these things to life. That the author may not even know I'm doing it.
Yeah, that's what I was gonna say.
Yeah.
Do they? Back when you started, especially, you were kind of doing things intuitively or things to draw out from their story, these connecting points and these threads, as you mentioned. And so that was early. You didn't have a system, didn't have a process. You're like, oh, this is what I do, ABC.
Yeah.
You were just kind of jumping in, doing what was in your heart and who you are and what your experience from reading. Yeah. And that's how you began that.
Totally.
That kind of journey.
Yeah. It was very much mirrored reading all those books over all those years. And I think so this is where back to, my brilliant path into writing through pre-med, which by the way was because my grandfather was a physician in San Diego.
Okay.
So that was sort of a family plan. And I didn't devastate anybody by not going into medicine, but that was where the family plan came from. I still have frankly, I'm still really interested in medicine, just as a, not a practitioner obviously, but just as a, it's just the human body's fascinating, psychology, all that stuff to me is still fascinating. But because of that background, and I really do have sort of a natural inclination toward process thinking. Some would say scientific thinking. I don't know that I'm that sciencey, but I do gravitate to process. Like even engineering is probably a better way to say it, like how things work.
Yep.
And so at the beginning, it was intuitive. I didn't sort of name the process. I didn't have like the steps. I didn't have anything like that. But what I realized in time, and maybe year 3, year 4, year 5, I realized, oh, I'm doing the same thing every time. Maybe there's a way to sort of create a methodology, even a modality because of the interaction with the other person, which is what it would be called in counseling. And so that led to sort of the birth of DISTILL and inviting the author into the process.
Yeah. So it's not just you. And I want to make sure we paint a picture too also of what's happened since then, because the most recent stats, and correct me if I'm wrong, is that you're now up over ghostwriting over 50, 55 books, or is that
some
approximately? Yeah, that's which is a lot of books.
Yeah,
it's a lot of books. 4 others that you've written it for.
Yeah.
13 New York Times bestsellers, 12 New York Times bestsellers. Yeah. Revenue from those books over 20-something million.
25 million was the last.
Okay.
It was counted, and that was probably a year ago. So
I know a lot, especially with what we do and my background and LeaderPass and all that. I know a lot of people who've written books. A lot of people love to write books, and that was kind of back in the day. It was kind of like you got to write a book whether you're self-published or published.
Right.
Most people don't write books to like get rich and make money. They think they are. They think, oh, I'm going to make a lot of money writing a book. Yeah. It's very, very unlikely that that's going to happen. Even if they succeed, typically you don't make money from a book.
No.
But all that to say, that success that you've had has been with a variety of different people. Back to what you were saying. Yeah. So you've got sports in there. Give us kind of a rundown of genre.
Yeah. Obviously there's people similar to John who obviously his topic is leadership, but he's a thought leader. Right. I mean, he sort of predated the phrase we use, thought leadership now. Yeah. So a lot of thought leaders who obviously have a role. Some of them literally are just authors, teachers, speakers, which John is. John was a pastor, but like after he broke, after he left the church, in good terms, it wasn't a bad thing. He left the church to do what he's doing still today. He's, true thought leader. His job is teaching people, people what he knows. So that is, let's say, a fourth of the, if I had to put them in categories, that's probably a fourth of the type of person I work with. I've worked for quite a few executives, C-suite executives mostly, chief executives, COO, CMO, that kind of thing. That would be sort of category 2, and I'd probably put entrepreneurs in that category.
Okay.
So this would be like
business-related type.
Business-related, founder, entrepreneur, big idea. It's how they created their business, and they want to share. There's something that can be replicated out there for a big audience. So that's probably category 2. Athletes, professional athletes, I'd put in probably category 3.
Yeah, which was kind of, we'll come back to this, but it's kind of the early days of a group process for the first time. If I'm not mistaken, was with a group of athletes.
Correct.
Keep going. I just want to make sure.
Correct. Yeah. So athletes, I'd put in that third category. I put artists in that category too. So like written for a few musicians. I'm trying to think I don't think I've written for anybody that's sort of in the acting world, but let's say athletes and artists.
Okay.
Category 3. Category 4, I would just really put as we would probably today call them like luminaries, or celebrities would be that. I don't like calling them celebrities because they're not all sort of formal celebrities where you see them on the cover of magazines all the time. But these would be people that are well known for something they've done. It could be films, it could be music, it could be starting and selling a big company. But they're now just sort of known for something.
Okay. Yeah.
And that's sort of a fourth category, and that's really probably just the category where I put people that I don't know where to put them.
Right.
It's just in my head. It's I broadcast this stuff because I can't. But so that's kind of the broad range, and obviously you get a lot of different topics in there. You get a lot of different stories, a lot of different people. Full range of age. A client right now is 73, probably.
Okay.
In the early 70s. And I've written for people as young as 17, actually.
Oh, wow.
Last year.
Okay.
Yeah, last year I helped a kid that was 17 years old.
That's really cool. And I think that what I love about, number one, your success is proven. Because, for someone to get a New York Times bestseller, that's, man, I'm on there. That's a life accomplishment.
Yeah.
For you to have been able to help and ghostwrite 13 of them or 12 of them is just amazing to me. And so what I love about that success is that this is not like, oh, I've got a process to write a book. I know lots of people who have, and their processes are great.
Yeah.
They're super.
There's a lot of good
But
processes.
I love how you came up with what you call DISTILL, and that is from going in one-on-one with someone, putting them through this thing just naturally like you were doing it, and then going, wow, I'm kind of doing the same thing over and over.
Yeah.
They answer questions, they open up, they share with you. One question I would have is, before that process, how many of the people that you sit down with start with, I know exactly what I want to write about, and bring it to you and go, this is what I want to do?
More than half, probably.
Okay.
More than half. Yeah. And I would say the process, and I know we'll talk about a little bit more about it, but the process, I think, in part it was two reasons I created this process that we called DISTILL. One, as a reaction to people coming in and saying, here's the book. It wasn't because I wanted to just call people out and be like, it's not the book, it's a terrible idea, blah, blah, blah. I don't mind being direct with somebody and tell them it's a bad idea. It wasn't about that. I didn't want to be this person that just said, hey, here's the bad news, not the best idea, that's probably not going to sell, it's going to disconnect with the audience, or whatever might be the case. I wanted to be able to provide a solution for it. I didn't want to just say, bad idea, let's figure out I wanted to say, bad idea, but here's how we can figure out what the best idea is. So I actually don't say bad idea. Not really a good way to start out with any client. But what I do say is, let's explore. Let's go through this process. Just set aside whatever it is that you have, mapped out in your mind already, maybe on paper. Some people come in with full outlines. Some people come in with 100 pages of an outline mapped out in a manuscript, which is fine. I tell them, hey, let's use this process called DISTILL for affirmation. Right. Maybe it's going to affirm everything you've done, but maybe it's going to elevate it and make it better. And I would say very rarely does going through this process on the front end of these books that I do completely depart from the idea that they had.
Okay.
Largely, what happens if it's any sort of departure at all, it's they honed in too much on one particular, area of their expertise or area of their story.
Okay.
And it didn't allow enough breadth to connect to a really broad audience. Got it. It was almost like pigeonholing themselves. Yeah. And they see it. They see it after they do the process.
Interesting. And when you do that, or when you did that, at some point and I like that too, because you're not just winging it. I see a lot of people that are great at what they do, and it stops with them because, which puts a couple things, just to talk for a second, business-wise, it puts you in a position where you can't scale.
Right.
If it's just you can't scale. I've heard that 100 times. People that have given me advice to go, hey, if it's all and only you, and you've got the gift, you can still have that gift, but how do you now take that gift and multiply your time? Because otherwise, it's a lot of one-on-ones that you're gonna. Because I know you literally walk people through a full day to walk through this process. Yeah. And from the beginning to the end, they pay you to come in, you do it. Yeah. And then even from there, it's like, okay, now do you take on their book and do you write their book? But that process, taking it from what was intuitive for you, or trial and error, and get to a point where you like the process. Right. How did you go from there to going, all right, I'm gonna put this down on paper and try to communicate the process?
The conversation like you were talking about people have had with you, where it was, two things happened. One, I realized I love this process. It's one of my favorite parts of writing the book. And it's not even writing the book. It's figuring out what the best book is, what the most potent book is that connects with the broadest range of people. And how it connects. It answers a lot of questions. And so I wanted to be able to do that more. I knew, as you said, there's only so much time I have that I can do that, besides the fact that I can't go around and just be taking people through this, full day process if I'm writing, books. At some point, I got to sit down and write a book. I got to sit down and write. So my time's limited. I can't really scale. I can scale myself a little bit, but not to the degree a legitimate business would. And so I had to come up with a way to sort of figure out how to create an opportunity for people to almost self-service. I'm guiding people through it, but how can I guide people through it without actually physically being there? Right. That was sort of the, how do I do that? So it was conversations like you talked about. Brent, are you going to just continue to just do books? And and it's fine. I mean, the business model, I can. Everybody deals with this. You have a really good product or a really good service. It's in high demand. Obviously increases what you can charge. You get to a certain point though where there's only so much you can charge. I mean, if you get into ridiculous range, your pool of people that you're going to get to actually pay you to do it is very small. Yeah. That creates another problem. It creates a sales and marketing problem. And I didn't want to get there. I didn't want to get into, as my agent says, presidential writer range, because there's only been 46 family books.
Right. You're limited on.
And they're not all alive. And they've all written books already. But that level, I didn't want to get there. I didn't want to. It's a big jump. It's a big jump. You go from, where I am now and where I've kind of been probably for the last 5 years or so to, you almost double, sometimes triple. You can demand that bigger amount, but again, the pool gets really small. I didn't want to scale that way. Is the whole point. I didn't want to try to scale that way. Yeah. Really, it's not scaling. It's just making more money. Yeah. It's just increasing revenue, but it's not really scaling anything. It's actually descaling in a way. So I thought, you know what? I'm going to go to the thing that I truly enjoy doing. That I feel like is my. If I have a secret sauce, it's that front end process. I attribute, the bestsellers and all the success I've been able to have to that process. I feel like it goes back to taking the time to do that, which goes back to having that sort of like pre-med brain, that sort of brain that likes to think process. How does this work? How does this best work? And I think if you can figure that out on the front end of a book, and by the way, it works for. You can create a business from it, you can create a brand from it, lots of different things you can do. I just happen to be in books. But if you can get it right here, and you're not only are you connecting to your audience, you're creating the, I call it the essence, the essence of the book, the essence of the author's brand. The distillation process, by the way, we talked about like why I called it distill, but it's called distill, this process we're talking about. distillation, the actual process of distillation, of a liquid, the product of distillation is called the spirit or the essence.
That's right. Yeah.
We drink spirits. That's why drinks are called spirits. So I called it distill because I said what I want the essence or the spirit of that person.
Love that.
Yeah. And that to me is where a book should be created.
That's excellent. That's excellent. And I know we've talked about that before. It's like the book is where you're, part 2 of it is, but if you're putting an individual through distill, by the time they're done, they've got something that is uniquely theirs. And I know we're going to get into that process, but also it's something that, I watch people write books. I watch people give talks, TED Talks, stage talks, come into LeaderPass studios to film courses.
Yeah.
And most of the time, I hate to say it, most of the time I'm like, yeah, I've read that, I've seen that. That's actually a direct phrase from a famous speaker author.
Right.
And
a lot of recycled stuff.
Yeah. And several years ago, when you and I were talking about it, it was my phrase to you, I think, was that everybody wants to speak or everybody wants to talk, but very few have something to say. And that something to say is the way that I view that as, okay, now that's something that's uniquely theirs versus I'm going to take from 10 speakers and call it my own. Come up with a cool name. And that's it.
Right.
And that applies to everything, which is back to this process. And I do love the fact that your brain works that way. It would be extremely hard. It's very hard for athletes and people I've been around to teach you how to do what they do. They have to stop and think because they've done it so many times and it's so normal.
It's natural. It's just very natural.
But distill that essence, that spirit of that person or that process. What is your phrase when you think about, what this is going to help them figure out? What is that initial phrase that you came up with for distill?
I mean, the idea behind distill is 2 things really, but it's owning what you know, but it's also knowing what you own. I mean, those are sort of like the 2.
Owning what you know.
And knowing what you own. So it starts with knowing what you own.
Right.
And that's what most people skip.
Okay.
Everybody wants to own what they know. But the knowing what you own piece is everybody just sort of assumes. And the reality that I think the older you and I get, we kind of come to the place where we realize, we fool ourselves pretty good. Like, in your 20s, you think you're pretty straight up with yourself and et cetera, et cetera. You realize, you get into your 30s and you get into your 40s and you get married, you have some kids. You realize, I haven't been really truthful with myself about that. I've been sort of playing a part over here, but like, this is really who I am. And I don't mean like in a way that's going to get you put away or whatever. But like, we just have these little ways of leading lives, aspirational lives, instead of authentic lives. A really cool quote on that, Stephen Pressfield, who most people would know as the author of The Legend of Bagger Vance, which is made into a movie with Charlize Theron and Matt Damon and Will Smith. Great writer, phenomenal writer. Also wrote the War of Art, which is another kind of the War of Art. And in the War of Art, he says, most people live 2 lives. There's the life you actually live, and then there's the unlived life inside you. And then he says, between the 2 stands resistance, fight the resistance. That is one of the truest things I've ever read.
That's awesome.
As it relates to content, most people, and I don't mean this like in a, they're being, they're wrong for doing this or they're willfully doing this, but most people try to write out of that life they live instead of the unlived life inside them. And there's a huge difference because it's hard to differentiate the life you live because it looks like everybody else's life. We tend to model a lot. We tend to look for affirmation and do things because we're seeking affirmation. We tend to do things because we're, wanting to be accepted. So the easiest way to be accepted is to do something we've already seen accepted. Taking chances, being original, being highly creative, doing something you haven't seen done before, scary, and higher chance for rejection, way higher chance for rejection. So few people live that way. Of course, you have outliers that naturally live that way, but then if you get too abstract, you're not, palatable for the for the masses.
No one can connect with
it. No one can connect with it. And so the real trick, and going back to that quote is, pay attention to that unlived life, like jump into that unlived life inside you, which I believe is the ultimate frontier of creativity. we talk about the word originality a lot. We talk about the word ownership. Ownership's been a kind of a buzzword for I don't know, 5 years now.
Or authenticity.
Or authenticity. Yeah, they all are.
Yeah.
They all are. And so, obviously the question I ask when I, hear those things all the time is, well, where does that originate? We're like, where does that come from? I mean, yes, we all have the capacity for all that stuff: authenticity, originality, creativity, all that stuff. To me, it doesn't come from looking out here and trying to put a new spin on something you see out here. Like, creativity can happen that way for sure. We're inspired by a lot of things. We're inspired by beauty. We're inspired by other people, something we hear, something we see. And there's nothing wrong with that. I mean, I think a lot of, the intake we have, obviously ends up coming back out in different forms, which is great. If that wasn't the case, then there'd be no point in, being entertained by music and seeing movies. And I mean, all these things we're learning from, reading books, educating, all that stuff. But the reality is there's this huge untapped source inside us. And I say that real broadly. I don't mean literally our psychology, our psyche, and all that stuff. That's part of it. I just mean this unlived life that's inside us. The thing that we haven't looked into, our history would be what probably a counselor would say. When you look into your history, and when you look at it with what I would just call an editorial eye.
Like your personal history or your
look at the story of your life.
Okay.
When you look at the story of your life, from my standpoint, as somebody who writes for a living, where you have sort of this editorial eye, you can see the potency, the power of that story, if you're able to see it in a very objective way. The problem is, because we're out here seeking affirmation, seeking acceptance, wanting to be loved, wanting to be popular, whatever it is, wanting the likes, all that stuff, because we're living out here, we just use an edited version of that story that's in here.
Okay.
What's acceptable? We promote and tell the story that's acceptable, that we know as high acceptance, that we know is going to make us more money, whatever it is. Instead of, and the fear there is that if we actually let the whole thing out, if we actually live truly authentically and let the whole thing out, where this massive, pool of creativity is, if we do that, then the acceptance we have, the popularity we have, the affirmation we have, all those things that we seek, which are very human things to want. Belonging, we all want that. Our fear is that that's going to go away. Our fear is that rejection is going to come in. It's not going to be acceptable. It's too vulnerable. Yeah. Which Brene Brown has done, obviously a ton of work on that, which I think has opened a lot of people up to the importance of that story. But back to the books, that process on the front end, it almost disallows you to just say, here's my life, and we're going to write from the external life.
So that's part of why maybe people come with a slice of what they they do, because they're just not, they don't have a way to do that. It's not a natural thing to do.
Right.
But that process and distill is a way to tap into that and do that. And by the time you walk through that, is that where it unearths for you? I know you've got 3 questions that you asked, but is that where it unearths the beginning part of, like, what is it that I know and what is it that I own?
Yeah.
Is that part of that outcome?
Yeah. And it's, like the first question of the distill process is, what do you own? Or what do I own? Obviously we're talking about cars and houses and clothes. It's not a possessions thing. It's what has your life story, the life you've led, given you in terms of expertise? What topics do you have what I call an ownership stake in because of the life you've lived? That is a question that if you just ask somebody, I would say they probably could get 2 or 3 fairly accurately.
Okay.
But my experience is that most people, they get 2 or 3 accurately. From 4, 5, 6, 7 and on, that's aspirational. That's things they hope are true about them.
Interesting.
Things they aspire to be true about them. But if you look at their life story, you're like, but you really don't have an expertise in that. There's no evidence that you have an expertise in that.
Okay.
And by the way, expertise, I don't mean you have an MBA, you have a PhD, you studied it. I mean like lived in experience.
Like experience,
Yeah, lived in experience that creates expertise. So like an example, I was adopted at birth. My siblings are all adopted. My oldest daughter's adopted. I have 2 aunts who are adopted, niece and nephew. Lots of adopted people. So adoption, whether I I never sought out to sort of get to learn about adoption, to study adoption in school. I've never worked in a career around this topic of adoption, but my lived-in experience is that I have a ton of experience with adoption.
Yeah. Okay.
So I have expertise to talk about that topic.
Yeah.
Because of my lived-in experience. Frankly, more so than somebody who, has worked for, the Department of Family and Children's Services for 5 or 10 years.
Yeah. If you put you on a stage, or they put them on stage, they would have amazing knowledge and, but if you get on stage, you are the living example of what that looks like.
Yeah.
And your kids and your siblings or whoever. And so that's your dog if you adopted him.
Yeah. But true.
Yeah. But it's a big difference. Big difference.
Big difference. Yeah. I talk about weight a lot. The weight, we've heard the phrase weight of your words. And I think we sort of intuitively know what that means. Obviously it's not like a, pound, it's not a scale, but there is a weight, there's a gravity to words that are spoken when they're spoken from somebody with authority to say them, with a lived-in experience to talk about it.
Yep.
So like give you an example. You hear a veteran, who's been in wartime, who's seen the horrific things they see, who's experienced death, who's all these different things that you experience in war, and they talk about resilience. That's a lot different than somebody who has lived, let's just say, a fairly normal life. They've had some hardships. Maybe I'll put myself in there. I got kicked out of high school or expelled from high school for a little bit for being stupid. And by the way, not academically stupid, for doing stupid things.
Yeah.
And I should have been kicked out for about 20 other things, but which would have been a hardship. But I stuck to it, and I went to college, and I got my degree, and I have a good career. Like, sure, I could talk about resilience, like the weight of that, if I put it, if I give the comparison, the weight of my talking about it is like a pound. The weight of this veteran talking about it is like 1,000 pounds.
Yeah.
That is way more weighty.
And that's what you mean by like what your experiences are, your expertise or whatever.
Yeah.
But is what you're saying you own.
Yeah.
And so it's interesting because it almost feels like you didn't intentionally try to own it. You look through your life and you see the pattern, or you see these.
Yeah, I personally feel, this is my personal opinion, I feel like it's God-given. And I feel like most of us, it's easy to sort of, in some cases, you almost kind of push it away. You don't want it. Like, I remember taking an athlete, a pro athlete, through the DISTILL process a month after he had retired from the NFL, never playing it down. He tried to rehab a horrific injury he had in college, tried to rehab for a year and a half, still got drafted. He was a once in a generation player. So still got drafted after this horrific knee injury by the 49ers. Ended up rehabbing for a year and a half, never ended up seeing the field, retired. And we went through the process, and one of his strongest topics of expertise or ownership stakes was loss. And he had,
so ownership doesn't have to always be positive. You're not saying, this is great, this is what I've done.
No,
You're saying even loss.
Yeah. And he might, obviously he's not like going out and like celebrating that, like, okay, I've had a lot of loss in my life. That's great. Like nobody chooses that. But he was given that, and so, he had like divorce early on. He had deaths in his family. He had, this thing that happened in high school. He had this, horrific injury in college. Then he gives up his dream at 23 years old, his lifelong dream to play in the NFL at 23 years old. So he had a lot of loss and at a young age. And yes, people have had more than that.
Yeah.
Most people have had less. But he had, when he talks about loss, or let's put it like in maybe a softer word would be adversity. He's had a lot of adversity, he's older now, but 23 or whatever he was, 23, I think he was 23 years old. He'd had a lot of adversity in his life, a lot of adversity. So his ability to talk about that is weighty. When he talks about that, it's quite weighty. Versus like my example of myself, at 23, so I got expelled from high school. I got put on probation at my first college I went to because I wasn't going to class. Yeah. I didn't have a whole lot of adversity. I lost my grandmother at 16. That was probably the worst thing that happened to me, which was terrible. But a lot of people lose grandparents as you get older into teens and 20s and 30s. And not to diminish those things, but if he is going to stand on a stage and talk about a topic, that's one he could talk about.
100%. I get it.
That is not one that I would. I wouldn't get up and talk about resilience, talk about loss. Could I have a conversation? Sure. Could I relate to it? Sure. But I'm not gonna put a stake in the ground, build a brand and business out of overcoming adversity. I'm just not.
It's incredible. And I, before we leave the idea of coming up with what that is, based on someone's story, what I love about the process of DISTILL as well, is that this is not like a week-long process. This is like 15 minutes.
Yeah.
Like you intentionally create an environment that, I don't know if it's forcing people to go through that, make quick decisions, because I could see if I went through that and you were like, okay, I'll see you next week and tell me what you own and what you're like, I'd be like, I don't know where to stop or where to start, or, so I do like the compressed time. Yeah. And that is unique, I think, because you are capable still of getting the information you need out of that client or out of that individual. Yeah.
It's incredible. So that comes from kind of a psychology, not background. I was about to say background. I have a zero background in psychology outside of going to counselors. Being on this side of that was the psychology over there. But fascinated by it, So, and one of the things I've learned, like a million people, like my high school daughters have learned, is that compressed time it kind of puts us in fight or flight, flight or freeze, technically. And when you get in that sort of like fight, flight, or freeze, when your body gets into that sort of state, your synapses fire quicker. That's the easiest way to say it. Yeah. You think of things quicker, you do things quicker. Your body just works in a much greater efficiency because your body senses danger. It's a survival mechanism. And so I thought, okay, well, if I'm gonna do this process, and I'm gonna ask somebody to tell me their story, I'm gonna make them map it out in 15 minutes, which sounds insane. Yeah. I will say the 73-year-old who I'm working with right now has lived an extremely full life, billionaire. Like, he's incredible success, incredible story, and he finished with a minute to spare.
Wow.
Yeah. And so, I mean, there is a way to do it, and it's not the way for the listeners that they may be thinking like, how in the world can you, like, 73 years, how can you tell that? Well, you're not telling anybody initially. You're mapping it on a timeline. So, a line, here's where you're starting, finish with your last most significant event, and you're just plotting, dot above the line if it's positive, dot below the line if it's negative, and a word or two to describe what it was. But because the time is compressed, and because I'm in their ear going, okay, you're at 10 minutes, okay, you're at 5 minutes, okay, you're at 2 minutes. Right. And I tell everybody right off the bat, that first 5 minutes is gonna feel like 30 seconds. It's gonna go really fast. Yeah. And when you hear me say 10 minutes, it's gonna probably elevate that sort of fight, flight, or freeze in your body. You're gonna be like, oh my gosh, I already wasted a third of my time. But doing that, what I'm looking for, and it has worked flawlessly, is that I'm getting top of mind, top of heart, events, in their life. Instead of, if I gave them an hour, if I gave you an hour to do your narrative timeline, and here's the line and dot, 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 dot. If I gave you an hour, you would get so in the weeds. Oh, yeah. You'd probably, there could be big chunks on there where you're like 5 years have passed and you take up half the timeline. And that's fine. It's all part of your story. But the problem with that is it's really difficult to read. So what I do is they do this timeline in 15 minutes, and then I let them recount it to me. Okay. And there's no time limit on that.
So it's more about capture the idea in that compressed time, and then you get them to discuss it.
It's a little bit of a trick that filters out the aspiration of how they naturally think of and tell their story. I don't want them to have that aspiration, because you ask, I could ask you your story, and you could completely skip over a really hard time in your life.
Oh yeah.
Or diminish something that is significant. If you were pressed, you would say, yeah, that was really significant, but you don't want to talk about it. Mm-hmm. So we tend to skip over those things. Or it could be something like, I remember I did some work with a young woman who at 21 years old inherited a multi-million-dollar portfolio from her parents, and it was something their family did. And she was a sophomore, junior in college, And it immediately created this thing where she felt like a phony, because she didn't. What do? Just go tell everybody? In college, these are college people. What?
No.
I mean, yeah, of course, people's parents have money. People's parents might have had more money than her parents had, but they themselves did not have a portfolio in their name that was worth, I think at that point it was like $10 million. Point of that story is that she didn't, for several months, did not tell people that part of her story, even though it was a massively significant thing in her life.
Talking about it.
Turned out to be one of the great. I mean, she's amazing, and she's super generous, and she had very thoughtful in how to use it and how to steward it and all that stuff. But she didn't want to tell that part of her story. Mm-hmm. So let's say you met her at that time, and she wanted to write a book, and she tells you her story, and she leaves that part out.
A huge part of it, yeah.
That she was and she inherited multi-millions of dollars at 21 years old while she was in college, which, for somebody like you and I who don't know her, that would potentially be one of the most fascinating parts of her whole story.
Yeah.
But she might leave it out.
She was just keeping it quiet.
Because she felt like it separated her from everybody.
Interesting. That's interesting.
Yeah. And so that 15-minute compressed time, I mean, sure, people can still get in there and, and cheat a little bit.
Yeah.
Not cheat, but like withhold stuff. But what they don't know is it's 2 layers. So that 15 minutes is the compressed time. I'm trying to remove aspiration as much as I can because they're just in a hurry.
Yep.
So they don't have time to think like an editor. They just have to metaphorically speaking, write. You just have to get through it. The second part, when they're recounting it to me, so that process, that first part, that timeline, the 15 minutes is sort of the BS filter. Mm-hmm. I'm the BS filter when they're recounting it to me.
Okay.
Because I'm going, okay, so 10 years old, your parents got divorced. You went to live with your mother, but you had a really good relationship with your father prior to that. And yet the next thing on your thing is you're 20. So what happened from 10 to 20?
I got you.
So not in it, that made it sound like I'm like mean about it or whatever. I'm very curious, Yeah. And I'm, I have like no background in counseling. My wife's a counselor, but I have no background in it. I've been counseled far more than I've given any counsel in my life. But there is a little bit of a sort of a counseling role in that. But in the end, I'm just observing, I'm just staying curious. And ultimately, keep in mind, what we're looking for after that timeline's done is these ownership stakes.
Absolutely. That's the direction.
And if they remove stuff,
then you're
significant stuff, then you might miss a really significant ownership stake.
Huge pieces.
Yeah.
Okay, so we just talked about ownership stakes. We talked about what it means to own something based on your life story and your history. But let's back up and why don't you just kind of give a broad brush of, in a nutshell, what is DISTILL and what is this process?
Yeah. Okay. So if I'm describing the process to somebody who's, doesn't even know what I do necessarily for a living, and I'm just saying, hey, here's this process, and let's say it's not even what I do, I'm just telling somebody else about it. I would say that it is a core, it's almost like an archaeological dig in your own story, in your own life. If we are going as like a thought leader or as the chief executive of a company or trying to create a culture or an author wanting to write a book or a next book or a keynote speaker, all of those people, and there's more categories than that, they base what they talk about, the information they share, the expertise that they share, and the experiences that they use to sort of bolt on those, the expertise they share. They base that all on an understanding of their own journey in life to that point.
Okay.
What DISTILL is, to my knowledge, I mean, I'm sure there's assessments you can take that do this. I'm sure you can sit down with a counselor and they can help you do this. But to my knowledge, it is the only process in the course of, obviously we have an online course to do this. I do it in person as well, but it's a half day to a day process in person. It's far less than that if you're taking yourself through it. But to my knowledge, the only process that really allows you to sort of do an archaeological dig into your own story and mine for the core, most potent topics that you have expertise in based on the life you've lived, what you can say about them with authority. So there's an exercise in the DISTILL process where you actually assign messages to those ownership stakes. And then after those two those first two questions, what do I own, what can I say, which we haven't talked about yet, that last question, what do I matter, it's just a relevance question. So you're taking these topics you have an ownership stake in, you're taking the messages, what you can say about them with authority, and then you are connecting that to what I call transcendent threads. Universal themes is another way to talk about them, but basically it's things like love, loss, hope, truth, mystery. I think we talked about at the very beginning of our conversation. These are themes, or I call them threads, that are prevalent through your own story, through your own journey.
Okay.
But more importantly, they are the threads, because they're transcendent, they connect you to your audience. So in the end, because it's a distill, you're really going for that essence, that spirit. I distill a person's story to the threads, the universal themes or transcendent threads that connect their story to everybody else out there. If I understand what that is, and I just do, there's three of them. There's a pattern, by the way, in how those three threads play out in your life, and it repeats itself. If I understand what that is, then I understand the impact that person has, the effect that person has on another person, if they are living out of their authentic self, if they are building something, writing something, speaking something out of their authentic self. And by the way, I believe it is the most impactful way to speak to an audience, to market to an audience, all the different ways that we connect with other people, to connect to other people. This is foundationally, we're talking about relationships in the end.
Yeah. And you're almost building a pseudo relationship with your audience.
Yeah, of course.
The reader or listening to you to a talk. So it's the ownership that connects to what can you say. So you come up with messages with that, but you're trying to get to essentially the transcendent threads, the three, and the pattern that you're talking about. And to me, that almost sounds like that's what's making this work. Because if you just said, hey, I'm going to listen to your story and come up with things that happened in your story, okay, great. But what you're really doing is you're saying, now what is it that you own with authority? What can you say with authority, and then the transcendent threads, because of this whole process, is magic. That's the part where I'm going to have somebody read a book, or they're going to, and it doesn't even, you haven't said it had to be this topic even. It's just whatever your topic is. Okay.
There's, so again, the whole process itself, with distillation, you're sort of removing the impurities. That's kind of the idea of actual distillation. We're doing the same thing with your, let's say life experience. I keep saying story, but let's just say life experience. It's more of a broader way to talk about it. The assumption is that we all want to take our life experience and not only live from it, we want to communicate from it, we want to create things from it. Maybe those three things, kind of broad categories. What's true about all of that is that you're relating to other people. You're also relating to yourself, by the way, which, we won't get into the psychology of all that stuff, but there is an element of that helps even just sort of with personal growth, with becoming a better person, with becoming, more free and more vulnerable, to use Brene Brown stuff. But the assumption I have, as a person who's asked to write books for people, is that, don't you want to understand what connects you to the biggest audience in the greatest particular way? And that not only connection, but that is based on life experience that you actually have an ownership stake, you actually own, so that this isn't just a one-off thing. This isn't just a reaction to, like, you want to write a book about AI because AI is really big right now, but you have no background in AI other than just extreme curiosity and maybe some fear about it. That's fine. You can do whatever you want. You can write a book on it. But start a business, start a consultancy, that's going to be a little tough. Because people are going to say, they're going to say, what's your experience in that? And you can say, well, I wrote a book. Well, what about before that? Honestly, you're going to have trouble selling the books because you probably don't have the experience to write the book in the first place. So, but it becomes a little bit of a slippery slope if you just sort of play this reaction game where you're creating products, where you're building a solution, where you're doing these various things that, now I don't want to get, obviously in business it's a little bit different. You're reacting to a market, but when it comes to thought leadership, when it comes to your personal brand and its place in many different contexts, as a thought leader, as an author, as a speaker, as an executive or entrepreneur, owner, or founder of a company, even a manager, within a company, all those things, you can go about it in a number of different ways. You can play with a number of different tools. You can use a number of different tools in that. But the most powerful tools and the most effective tools are those that you have lived in experience with. I mean, we know this in one-on-one relationships with people.
Right.
You know,
right. Who you connect with.
yeah, who you connect with.
Yep.
We always talk about, oh, that person's just so real. You know, I feel like I'm just so easy to get to know. Well, what's happening there is that you're connecting with, you know, their lived in experience.
And is that a shared, okay, so is that saying, that's maybe too weird of a question, but is that saying that if you're 3, one of my 3, if I've got them, even though I haven't gone through DISTILL, is that what I'm feeling in that connection? Is that what you're suggesting? Or is it more just something I recognize universally?
Yeah, I mean, so my list of transcendent threads, just an aggregated list that I put together years ago based on a number of other lists. Love, loss, hope, truth, mystery, redemption. There's a lot of, they're transcendent. So we've all experienced them.
Okay.
So if one of my strongest transcendent threads is family, you're still going to connect to family. But like we see in relationships and friendships, those who have a transcendent thread of family are going to connect probably deeper.
Okay.
And better. And that's not, I mean, obviously everybody cares about family. Everybody's had experience with family. But experience is very different. You know, you may have had a really negative experience with your parents. You may have had, you know, God forbid, like an abusive situation with parents. You may have been orphaned, you know, to where it's a really hard subject to talk about. You know, so you connecting, where you would connect with me more, if that was your story, is if I had loss as one of my transcendent things.
Part of
than family.
Got it. But family would still be there, but not near as
still be there, because you've experienced it, but not quite. So, and the game isn't that you go out in there and try to find, I mean, to some degree, if it's a business, who are the people that have these 3 transcendent threads? Like, what's their demographic? What's their psychographic? I mean, that's a really interesting exercise, which I've done with a few clients that own businesses. You know, it's like, so now that I know this is my sort of secret sauce, like these 3 transcendent threads are my most potent way to, like, you know, have an effect on other people, to communicate to other people, to sort of, you know, usher myself into their lives and help with solutions, you know, them help me, et cetera, just connect. Who are those people? You know, and you can identify. I mean, I mean, there's all kinds of studies on that. You can go find that stuff if you want to, but you could also just sit down and have a meeting about it and say, who are the most obvious people that have, you know, loss as a transcendent thread? Who are the people that have mystery, which is actually a lot more popular one than people think? It's just the presence of a lot of unknown.
Oh, really? Yeah.
And, you know, a lot of us have experienced that. Obviously, it's transcendent, so we've all experienced it.
Yep.
But some people have gone from like one unknown to the next, just a lot of like unknowns in their life. Really, really powerful transcendent thread, because, you know, we're all going to come up to that situation where it might be introduced through a negative experience. It might be introduced through the loss of a loved one. It might be introduced through, you know, all of a sudden dating somebody new, you know, on the positive end. It might be introduced through a new job offer.
You're talking about mystery.
Mystery. Yeah. And all these things bring up this presence of unknown. Like, what's next? We don't know. We've actually never had this job before. I've never dated a person like this. I've never, you know, lost someone I've loved so much in my life. So all these things. So that's very relatable. Mm-hmm. Those that have had a lot more experiences like that, positive and negative, they don't have to be negative, have an ability to relate a great deal to those that are, now keep in mind, it's not just those, they don't relate really well to those that have just experienced mystery in their lives. They, in particular, will relate really well to those who are currently in a situation where they are experiencing a lot of unknown.
At the time of
connection. So when you're talking about audience, especially from a business standpoint, you know, if mine's mystery, let's say mystery, truth, redemption, if that's my pattern, you know, presence of unknown in my life, I've tried to find what's true, you know, and ground myself in what's true. And when I ground myself in what's true, I can redeem that circumstance. I can, you know, figure out what to do, or maybe progress, but let's say progress is the third. I can move on. So when it comes to the most natural audience that you connect with, those people that have experienced or are currently experiencing those particular transcendent threads right now are going to be your most natural. It doesn't mean you're not going to connect with anybody else.
Okay.
It just means that's going to be the stickiest and probably easiest relationship to form. Now, the flip side of that, which is crazy, is that if you don't give any credence to that or have any, you know, you haven't looked into that at all, and all you've done is gone out there and say, who's the audience I want to reach, you know, on one end. On this end, you say, what's the book I want to write? What's the business I want to start? What's the brand I want to create? and it's aspiration on this end and it's aspiration on that end. I mean, think about how hard it's going to be.
Oh, yeah.
The problem is it's not that there won't be connection. It's just it's not going to be really sticky. It's not going to be this magnet.
You know what it reminds me of, and it's I want to try to apply something with this, but it reminds me of an expert who's, let's say they've had a 30-year career, 20-year career, 10-year career, and they're an expert in any profession. Just name the profession, and they've got knowledge that they can pass along. They've got knowledge that they want to share or they want to monetize, which is a lot of what we do at LeaderPass. We help them take their expertise and create something that's going to be usable by someone else. Okay. So if the expertise that they have is something that's in demand and people want to learn it, whether it's leadership or it's how to, succeed on YouTube, whatever it is. You're saying, if I'm understanding this correctly, that could succeed. It could be a great course because it's based on some experience and their expertise, legit expertise. But what you just said, which is interesting, is that if they could incorporate these transcendent threads, it would be that much better.
Yeah, I think your path is so much shorter. Again, go back to the very beginning of our conversation. We're talking about differentiation. It's a crowded. I mean, thought leadership, YouTube. It's crowded. It's really crowded. Business, crowded. All this stuff. Writing books, crowded. Speaking, same thing. And so, if you want to do it the hard way, then sure. Just don't think about all this stuff we're talking about. But if you want to speed up that connection, and even more than that, have a much greater confidence in the connection happening.
True.
Then this is the stuff you want to think about. Now, I do get the question, from time to time, people that don't know my background, or not they don't know my background, they don't know that I've had success. Let's say.
Yep.
And they say, well, how do is this scientific? How can you prove that this works? And can I prove it in a lab? No. I mean, I probably could sit down with somebody who's a professional and they say, oh yeah, this is this modality. I've had some people that work in mental health and emotional health, and they have said, yeah, you're using this modality here and this modality, and I don't even know what any of that stuff is. But I will say, I just look at the results of it. The 12 New York Times bestsellers, the 25 million, in sales, the et cetera. That to me is proof that these connections are happening in a greater way. More people are buying books. When I've used this process on the front end. Now, keep in mind, we talk about these bestsellers, and I should say this just not as a caveat, but I'm not the only reason these books become bestsellers. There's buy-in on the author side too. There's a real.
What do you mean buy-in on the author side?
There's a buy-in to lean into this process.
Okay, got it.
And
meaning on the author jumps in. And
let's follow this process. Let's create a book. And by the way, if my transcendent threads are mystery, truth, and progress, it doesn't mean the book title is Mystery, Truth, and Progress. It doesn't mean the business is called Mystery Inc. or whatever. Sure, I guess you could do that. You don't even have to bring up the words. It is this core knowledge that helps you understand when I create a foundation, when I write a book around these threads, letting people look into and lean into and discover the unknowns in their life, the power in the unknowns, the fear in the unknowns. When I let them, when I talk about progress and making progress and what it really takes to make progress, and that there was a truth that was probably on the front end of that foundationally that allowed them to make progress, that they, that's the kind of stuff that makes books really sticky.
Gotcha.
For two reasons. One, you're talking about topics that are transcendent. So that's just a very sort of broad reason that that's sticky. The other reason is that the person writing, I'm referring to a book here, but a person writing the book is speaking from experience. So they're attaching stories. They're attaching firsthand experience.
Which is what brings it to life.
Which is what really brings it to life. And more than that, it allows you and I, as we're reading those books, to trust them.
That is true.
Because if you're writing your book on AI and I look in your background, it's like, Jamie owns a production studio and blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, you're invest in AI? What's your experience? What's the connection? I don't get it. And so there's just even if I like you, even if you're entertaining, it's almost like a comedian. Super entertaining, talk about a lot of topics. They can talk intelligently about a lot of topics. It doesn't mean they're experts in the topic. They're really just entertaining you. And I'm not going to necessarily go because a comedian talks a lot about AI and has a lot of jokes about AI. Go and buy a stock that person said to buy. In fact, it probably would absolutely not do that. But that's the world we live in is so much of the commerce around thought leadership I find is based on these sort of reactionary brands that are getting created, reactionary products that are getting created, and they're just banking on really good marketing, really smart marketing, and building up all this money. But then the problem is, it's pretty tough to build another vertical off of that.
How do you do that? Unless it really is a massive.
Yeah, you're either caught in the cycle of recreating that over and over and over, and just reacting over and over and over, or you build something foundationally that you can stand up and then spread this way versus just like build.
Yeah.
Which I know we're talking a little bit generalities, but you kind of get the point. It's
on the business front. Let me ask you this, because there are business owners, I'm sure, that are watching this. Is it the business owner that would go through this process, and then they would be the point person to take the 3 threads that they come up with through the process to their organization? Or is it top down like that, literally, the way we're describing it? Like if you're saying we're going to bring it into a business?
Yeah, not necessarily. There's 2 ways that I've seen people that I've taken through this that are either chief executives, COOs, C-suite executives, founders, and or owners. One, they want the culture to reflect those what they would call values in a cultural context. Okay. So I have these values of family, truth, love, whatever it is, whatever the transcendent threads are. I want the culture of this company to reflect those values. So that's one way that it gets applied. In terms of using the sort of the story, the narrative to do the ownership stakes, the life messages, the transcendent threads, it's kind of a dual path for applying that in a company, because you can't just use if it's the founder, it's a little different. The founder's story of starting the company is the company's story.
Yeah.
But if it's like a chief executive officer, and it's a company that's been around 60 years, and that they've been CEO for 20, there's a story that was before them. So you have to sort of bring in the story of the company first.
Okay.
And then in that story, this CEO gets inserted. And then it becomes, sort of this sort of co-story. They kind of go on the same path.
Interesting.
So it's a little bit different when it's a company like that. Now, like I don't know that every single person that's probably been, every author I've worked with hasn't been in that scenario where they're running a company and they want to, bring the story and their story and all that stuff in. That's a scenario that's come up before. I can tell you it's been very effective, not only from the standpoint of that CEO understanding the role they play in the company's story, in the company's history, but the CEO understanding the impact that it has on the culture of the company and the growth of the company when you sort of bring that together with clarity and it can be communicated to the people in the company.
I love how this can be done because it's about the human, it's about the person, and it's about their all of those facets and how essentially they're going to connect. But I love how it can be done in business. Obviously, writing a book can be done, I guess, in a stage talk in a lot of ways. Like if somebody has a big talk coming up. But what I love is that it's taking, or even a songwriter. Yeah. I mean, in some ways, artists.
Yeah, I've worked with a few musicians too.
Okay. Yep. So even that, I guess, having that knowledge about yourself and knowing where you're going to have these 3 transcendent threads, what you own, what you say, what matters. Yeah. And then being able to apply your skill or your craft or your work to that. I mean, I get it.
Yeah. So here's a really cool example, and I hope he's not listening to this and he'll get mad at me for I won't say his name. Musician, does really well, and was kind of struggling with sort of this next tour season, and like how do I kind of singer-songwriter, how do I, what do I do from stage? Like what's the order of the songs? What's my set list, et cetera, et cetera. And I said, let's go through this process. We're going to figure out your transcendent threads. And we did the whole process, figured out his transcendent threads, real eye-opening for him, gave him a ton of material, obviously, with ownership stakes, going through his life story again.
Almost may make it easier to write.
It was. He had a ton of material, ownership stakes and life messages. Think about life messages alone, all those messages in there. But then we got to transcendent threads, and what we realized was, he came to this, not me. It was just a killer idea. He said, I got it. I know what I'm going to do for my tour as I kind of do this next 6 months. I'm out there playing songs from stage. He's a singer-songwriter, so there's a little bit of interaction where he's talking. It's not just like a big full-scale concert where it's a big band on stage and all kinds of lights and all that stuff. He's a little bit more intimate. He said, I'm gonna actually take people through, by the tone and nature of the songs, each of my 3 transcendent threads.
Really?
And they're gonna go through the journey of those 3 transcendent threads. So I'm gonna have songs that fit in this category. Let's say it's mystery. I'm gonna have songs that fit in sort of the family category, songs that fit in the love story. I can't remember what his 3 were, but, and I was like, that's cool. That's cool. And I said, and he said, should I tell him that's what I'm doing? I said, I don't think you should tell him.
Yeah.
I said, you could. I said, it might be kind of cool to give context, but if you don't feel comfortable enough to explain it, it might get a little bit, you might get some, like, I don't know what you're talking about looks, you know?
Yeah.
I would just do it.
Yeah, just do it. It's like you said, you don't even have to have the words, whatever those threads are. And you said there's about 20, a little less than 20?
22.
22, which we haven't named them all.
Yeah.
Just to remind you, we haven't done that, which we don't need to. They can learn more about that as we go. But you're not even actually bringing those up necessarily. You can.
Yeah.
But there's a side of this that, to me, it's more impactful if you didn't.
Mm-hmm.
That's just me. I mean, maybe others will be like, no, I want to tell them. Okay, cool. But there's something about that is it creates something that is more special than, hey, okay, now I'm going to bring you through this transcendent thread of mine. Yeah, it would be weird.
Yeah, it would be weird. People wouldn't understand the way that transcendent threads play out in that setting, but in most settings, in all the settings we've been talking about, is if you think about them like a vibe. Let's just call it a vibe. It's a little bit more popular word these days than the word I had thought in my head initially to say. A vibe. So if you walk into a room and there is a mysterious vibe, we kind of know what that feels like. Mm-hmm. If there is a real progress-oriented, I was going to say progressive, that means a little bit different from a political standpoint. These days, like progress-oriented vibe, that's a little different. Things are kind of moving pace, very productive. If there's a love vibe, it's very, very different. A vibe of redemption. Mm-hmm. They all have these different sort of spirit essence about them, and when you've sort of entered into that. And you might not even be thinking, oh, this feels like redemption. Oh, this feels like mystery. Now, mystery, you may say, this is a little mysterious. Mm-hmm. Love, you may say, this is just feels very loving or accepting or whatever. That is essentially the impact that these things have when you understand them, especially when they come from lived-in experience. Right. So you're inviting people into that, but you're also relating to them through that. So where that singer-songwriter is concerned, he's not going to say, hey, now I'm going to play 4 songs about the theme of mystery. Right. People will be like, okay, great, whatever. He's just going to play them, and there's going to be like a mysterious vibe about them. Okay. Then he's going to play 4 songs. I don't know what his sets were for, whatever they were, but I'm going to play 4 songs about this. He's not going to tell him. He's just going to play them. But what he's doing is he's taking him through this journey that is his sort of transcendent pattern in life that he's experienced over and over and over. Now, at some point, he can say at the end, which I told him, I said, what would be cool is after the fact, tell them. Yeah.
Then you're kind of, it's a big reveal.
Explain it. Yeah. And I said you could have some fun with it, even with props, where if they're sitting in like a cafe and there's food, maybe you set something in front of them and they don't know what it is and you can't eat it yet and it's mysterious. Mm-hmm. And then the second time you tell them to cut into it and maybe there's progress or I don't know. Mm-hmm. We're just kind of spitballing, but there's a lot you can do around that. And the beautiful thing about it all, in the end, is that he has the ownership and authority to talk about that, to write songs about that, to so it's not this sort of foreign thing. It's not like, I tell people a lot of times when you're inviting somebody in or trying to connect with somebody around a transcendent thread, a particular transcendent thread that you have a lot of experience with, it's very similar to like, spelunking is like dropping down into a cave and there's only one light and you have the light initially, but you're inviting them down into this cave and you're showing them what you want to show them. And at some point they're going to go, oh, there's something over there, and you hand them the light. And they just connect. Gotcha. They connect. Gotcha. All of a sudden their own experience becomes connected to your own experience. And you both realize, wow, we're in the same cave. We kind of need to hang together because there's only one light in here, and let's share the light.
That's good.
A little bit of an odd, metaphor for it, but it feels a little bit like that. Yeah. And when the connections happened, it's happened. Yeah.
No, that's fantastic. Let's apply that to, imagine I'm a speaker or a keynote or somebody who is going to be getting up in front of an audience. I already know what my topic is. Let's say I'm being invited in to speak for a certain topic, or I've written a book.
Yeah.
It can enhance, dramatically enhance, if you're a speaker, going through this process, because you go through it essentially once. I mean, this isn't something that's, okay, your annual distill. It's
we produce a document at the end of it, so they have it all recorded.
all recorded. But when you go through this, knowing that if you did put that out while you're developing your talk or your keynote or whatever, speak to a speaker, somebody who is a professional, who's going out there and succeeding doing it. Maybe they aren't, maybe they're just starting. Speak to them for a second and say why it's important to go through this and apply it to that. We did the artist, but apply it to that.
Yeah, so it's a no-brainer for speakers, in my opinion. You know, the objective is, I mean, directly. It's not like business where it's like you got products and services, and of course you want to connect to the audience, but there's a lot of stuff going on there, a lot of different variables. With a speaker, it's literally you on stage connecting to an audience whose eyeballs you're looking at right in front of you. And the sooner you can do that, and the more effectively you can do that, the more powerful and impactful your speech is. Why not understand what it is in you that is transcendent, and write a keynote, create a speech around those transcendent threads, using stories that you've lived out, using your experience.
That you own,
And here's the thing, like you could just literally go up there and tell stories, but know exactly where those stories are connecting with those people. So tell stories and then make a point. You know, so what I see a lot, and this happens in books too, is that people will tell a story, but they'll miss the connecting point.
Okay.
They'll kind of miss where it connects to people. You know.
Okay, so how, or is that just because there's not their transcendent threads aren't?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, if you said transcendent threads, people they'd be like, I don't even know what you're talking about, you know. But it's largely just because it hasn't been thought through enough.
Okay.
I mean, honestly, it comes back to that. There's the life out here and the life in here, and if we live the life out here, our you know, R&D is, you know, did that person affirm it? You know, was this acceptable? Okay. You know, did I not get rejected? Which, you know, the bar kind of gets a little bit lower with each one of those. Like, you know, did I not get rejected is a pretty low bar. You know, was it excellent? Did it like blow them away? Did it change their life? Is really where they want to be. You know, but if all your sort of feedback is out here, not based on anything in here that you know is true, it's just these are your truths out here. It's just it's really hard to have a high bar for it. So like, you know, when you come in here and you say, here's who I am and what I have to offer. You know, number one, you know of course you're not going to get, you know, a standing ovation necessarily every single time. I mean, you know, there's some skill that comes with being able to deliver this thing. You could have the most incredibly outlined and practiced keynote ever, and then get up there and fumble it and not be a very good speaker. And you know that plays into it. But from the content standpoint alone, if you don't have the content, now people would say, well, you can still get up there and be really entertaining. Yeah, it's true. I don't think you're going to change a lot of lives, but you can entertain. There's a big difference there.
Yeah.
Entertaining and impact are
100%. Yeah, no, that's
two different things.
That's a great separate.
So like, do you want to be an entertainer? You know, yes, you could be a really great entertainer by being a really gifted speaker, by being really funny, or, you know, whatever it is. You know, there's a lot of people like that. And honestly, you can build a career if that's all you're trying to do. If you want to make a deep impact in people's lives and connect with them long term, which for me, I think about it from the business standpoint. Like, is there more you want to do with that audience? The more you want to do with that audience, for that audience, and them for you, then you need to connect. There needs to be a relationship there. There needs to just not be this transaction of entertainment.
It's not just the content, it's not just the joke, it's not just the song. It's also back to your words when you're talking about who's saying it, that impact. It reminds me, we love Nate Bargatze, the comedian. And not long ago, he had something, I think it was on TikTok or whatever it was, where he showed up at a comedy karaoke place, which I'd never heard of that before.
Yeah, that's very cool.
And so he gets up there and it's like, you know, Jerry Seinfeld, whoever's going to get up, and he's watching, and he's saying the words of their jokes. He's basically doing a little bit of their monologue, but he's having to say it like he's presenting it, like it's. And so it reminds me of the idea that you know, you can't pretend to have written that song if it's not really the song that's in you. You can't pretend to be the writer of the book.
But incredibly entertaining.
Great entertainment. And you could be, you know, it's like an actor. It's like a great actor. But ultimately,
Yeah.
especially if there's any long-term impact that matters,
Yeah.
then having this in your tool bag, having this as a part of what you do, is incredibly valuable.
Yeah, and think about, so a really good example is with musicians, bands, musicians, like music. These days, when we feel like we have a deep connection where we are understood and we understand a person that is entertaining us, a musician in particular, like look at Taylor Swift is a really good example. Like, 200 whatever million, I mean, just insane. Like her fans, the group of fans she has is just unbelievable. But her songs are intimate and they are very much steeped in her lived-in experience. And they connect with people very naturally because they are full of transcendent threads that she has experience with. So, it would make sense that she has, whereas you get, somebody else that they really just want to get up on stage and have people think that they're a gifted musician.
Yeah.
That's cool. You can entertain me, like, I don't know why I thought of this example. It's an interesting example. So, Santana, you remember him?
Oh, yeah.
So, he sings, has been singing now for a little while. I guess he always has, but like for a long time, he was just the guitar.
Yeah.
Now, beautiful, entertaining, but I don't have a connection to him at all. Like, frankly, I couldn't even told you what he looked like back in the early days when he was playing. Like, I had no idea. And so, when he puts words to the music and when those words, now he's a bad example because I don't know if that plays out. He's all of a sudden connected to more fans. But it's very easy to see in music.
Yeah.
Like the bands, the musicians that we're loyal to, that we feel like they're just those that we feel really connected with. And that connection happens because of those transcendent threads connecting.
Right. That's amazing.
Yeah.
It really is amazing. Okay, let's talk about, because I'm super excited about this conversation you and I had a couple years back, 4 or 5 years ago, that is finally happening. And that is to say, and I remember, sitting down with you going, this is such a great process. I watched you take a couple of people through it, and I was like, oh my gosh, this is so life-changing for the person, but also can really radically launch some amazing authors and speakers, songwriters, et cetera. And so it was like, how do we take you, and where you're spending a day or half a day with somebody, how do we take what you do and translate that digitally? How do we take that and make this something that still remains personal?
Yeah.
Because, and that's important. And so, yes, I'm excited about you coming, with LeaderPass Studios to do workshops. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, I'm excited that you've filmed this, but I almost see this being step 1, step 2, step 3 with you. And that is, once people understand generally what you're saying, go through the DISTILL process on LeaderPass right now.
Yeah.
They're going to have some raw materials at that point that are pretty powerful.
Yeah.
I also see us having a follow-up to it, which is to take them through that step, step by step as well. But talk to me about the desire, obviously, to reach people in the same way. It's a little tricky. I mean, it's very tricky. So little details, like instead of putting you in an environment on a stage teaching this to camera, we wanted you in an intimate environment. Even this podcast is a little different set than we normally use, because I want this to feel like you're in a den with you or sitting across the table. And I think you even say that at some point in there. It's like, what would I do if I was just sitting down with you one-on-one? How do I take you through that?
Yeah. The interesting thing about the creative I'll start with the creative process and then I'll answer your question, because this is a really good segue, is that whether it's a book or a speech or a business, and I get that there's a little bit more variables in business, but let's just say a product launch for a business, probably the easiest way to talk about it is product or service launch. Music, same thing, song. All of those things, ultimately, if the person in the audience has never met you before, it is no different, in my view, than sitting across the table or like this at a cafe from somebody and sharing a cup of coffee. And you think about the dynamics of what happens there. So like, I don't know you, you don't know me. If I sit down and I just jump into my story and I start telling you my story and I spend 30 minutes telling you my story, trust me, like if it's me, I'm like 5 minutes in and I'm already looking at my watch trying to think of one excuse. Like see if I can see somebody else in the cafe that I can say, oh, let me go say hi to my friend, just to stop. Because it's very presumptuous, number one. A lot of people do that, and I get that it's just insecurity or whatever. Some people are arrogant and they do it because they're arrogant. It's like the full spectrum. But that's just not how you connect with somebody. You have to understand who that person is. You have to understand how you connect to them. So as you go and write a speech, write a book, launch a product in business, build a brand, create a song, all that stuff. The effectiveness of it is, a lot of it is, well, I think so much of it is based on that connection and how quickly you can make that connection with the end user of it. As it relates to, how do we break this thing down from like the in-person thing that I do, which is, half day, sometimes it's a full day, to a digital process. Recording the videos, obviously I'm able to guide people through it. Not a whole lot different than what we're talking about here. I'm talking about very similar things, just more tactically taking them through the steps, exercises for them to answer the questions. And if I was there with them, what I would ask them to do next and what they need to do next. I am actually, I don't even know that you and I have talked about this, creating an assessment around this.
Okay.
To where it's just obviously even less than going through the videos, something that you can take just to give you an idea of what your transcendent threads are right off the bat. Now, I'm not telling you what to do with them, but when it comes to what's next, so I know my transcendent threads, I get it, they feel true, they feel, sticky, they feel authentic to my lived in experience. Now what? Now what do I do with them? And what I tell people, obviously my line of work is that I build a book out from it. I've done keynote, I've done a ton of keynotes too. I have a lot of authors that say, hey, can we do a book and then do a keynote or 2 keynotes or 3 keynotes? I've kind of, done that whole span. I have not written music with people from it. To some degree, I've been kind of in the business space where helping people sort of launch products or, sort of retool a business culture around these transcendent threads. But the one thing that sort of unites all of that is that if this still is like this, like sort of this upside down pyramid, it really, think about it this way, it's the top half of an hourglass. Okay. I know an hourglass is more like this, but like think of it like this. You're distilling to that inflection point, which is where you and the audience are connected. Okay. The bottom half of that hourglass blows out. It kind of builds out. So it's like this. Okay. So this bottom half down here is what you were talking about, sort of like what's the next thing we do together? What's the next sort of product that we create on video where we guide people through it? It's building out the product. Now, I'm not going to be there in front of people to be able to say like I am with in person, where I can say, hey, we're doing a book or we're doing a keynote or you're launching a product for your business, marketing a brand, whatever it is. But I can tell you there's layers to that as well. There's a process to that as well. You're identifying the audience first. You're naming the premise, like what is this product intend to do? I like to call it the promise. It's easier to call it the promise. What are you promising the end user by doing what you're doing? What then is the product? Then you're coming down into kind of the marketing part. But that is essentially how it builds out. So DISTILL comes down to here. You have this sort of gold here that it's almost like this pass that allows you to sort of instantly connect with your audience. But you still need to identify who that audience is.
Still got to do work. There's still work to be done.
There's still work to be done. Yeah. And what's the product? Yeah. Because you might go into something, if you're in business, you might go into something and you're, I don't know, let's say you're in, like the clothing industry and fashion industry, and you say, okay, we have our next line, that we're wanting to do and wanting to figure out how best to market this. So let's go through DISTILL. And you go through the company story into the CEO story, and you kind of mold them together, and you kind of get these threads that are really kind of the strongest threads that the company and the leadership has, in tandem, that connect you to the buyers of your products. You might figure out that line that we were going to do, that's not the line we need to do. You might do this, and that's why you do this bottom process. Like there's so many assumptions that I see being made, with creation, the creation of all these things we've been talking about. There's so many assumptions. And to me, I'm like, listen, spend half a day with me in person, go through this process that we've created. That's less than half a day. And figure some stuff out. Yeah. Get some real
before you make the assumption.
Get some real clarity. Yep. Then create from that standpoint. And by the way, you get a ton of material in terms of product ideas, marketing, slogans, taglines.
All births out of
all that. Birthed out of that. Yeah, I've had dozens of people who've been through DISTILL go back to those life messages. The what can I say? Which, by the way, I kind of introduce compressed time with those too. I don't let people pontificate about it and like sit there and wordsmith. Yeah. What can you say about leadership? One sentence, tell me. But they go back to those life messages and they're like, oh my gosh, that's a book title right there. Yeah. Or that's my keynote speech, or that's right in there, let's find our product name out of that sentence right there.
Right.
And so it's just, it isn't, while yes, you are distilling to this point of understanding these transcendent threads and what connects you to your audience, you still have all this other material when you go back up. You have these messages, messaging, you have these.
So useful.
Yeah, it's all really useful, yeah.
Yeah, well, I've been super excited to see this come together and learn it. And you know where I sit with this, and that is I love to work. I love to work with thought leaders, existing authors, speakers, but I really love those who are starting this journey.
Yeah.
And it's so much fun to see people who are like, well, I've kind of felt like there's a book in me, or I kind of felt like I should be, taking my expertise. Some people are like, hey, I want to transition from my job and monetize my expertise.
Yeah.
But they don't know where to start.
Yeah.
And so one of the things that we love about what we do here is provide high quality equipment, studio. You've seen it. You see what this looks like now at LeaderPass Studios, but then also the platform to do it, because we've done this so many times. I love helping that new person because it's just so life-changing.
Yeah.
And what I equally love about the DISTILL process, it is one of the best starting points for someone like that who may even be established in their career already. They've just never done something like this. And when they do it, it radically changes and gives them a different trajectory than just coming and saying, here's my idea. And then trying to do it. So I think it's great.
You make a really good point. And there's a, for those listening that are even more established, or they would say, yeah, I've kind of already done this book, or I have this keynote I've been doing. And they hear what we're talking about, and they're like, well, I don't want to find out that I'm way off the mark. There's a little bit of fear in that. Like, I don't want to be called out as a phony, or whatever. That's really not. I've actually never seen that happen.
Right.
Most people, we know the life we live, but I will say it's most of us, because naturally we crave acceptance and vulnerability and belonging. Belonging and affirmation. We present to the world and live out of an edited version of our lives.
Right.
And sometimes it's for good reasons. Sometimes there's just not stuff that's for, general consumption, like you need to hold it back, and some people don't hold it back, and it does create some, some problems in their relationships. But what I can tell you is, when people that are a little bit more established, for new people, it's like a no-brainer. Start with that level of clarity. It'll give you so much material. It'll give you so much direction. It's almost like you get to walk into a store and you get anything you want in here. Just pick it out.
You pick it.
And this is all handpicked for you. It all fits you.
Yeah.
It all fits the lifestyle. It all fits your personality. All that stuff. That's kind of what you get from DISTILL for somebody just starting out. So then it just becomes more of a strategy game.
Yeah.
How do you want to roll it out? For those that are more established, what usually happens is two things. One, there's tremendous affirmation of some of the things they've been thinking, some of the ways they've been leaning. Sometimes they come in and they're like, I kind of feel, like we talked to somebody earlier that said, I feel like I have 3 books in me, and I'm like, well, you probably do, and knowing your experience, you probably do. But the big question is, where do you start? Because you got to connect with the audience initially somewhere.
Big time.
And if you miss on that first one, you might not get that second chance. You might have to go find another audience to reestablish it. So that affirmation is really powerful. And what I find is, most people that are a little bit more established through DISTILL, they get that affirmation, and the clarity is just unbelievable. Like you said, a lot of people, they come in and they think, here's my lane, and DISTILL, you do DISTILL. The tendency is to think a DISTILL is going to make it like this. It actually doesn't.
It's a reverse.
It goes like this.
Yeah.
And why? Because these transcendent threads are transcendent. Because all of a sudden you realize, I never even thought about that reaching that audience. But you're right.
You can.
If I start bringing in this part of my life experience, I immediately connect to that audience. I get them. I totally get them.
Yep.
You see it a lot in real interesting context, but you see it a lot with professional athletes when they retire.
Okay.
Of course, they relate with athletics. Of course, they relate with all the, the things related to athletics, grit and determination, and taking care of your body. All these different things. That's sort of the obvious stuff. Sure, they could go be trainers. They could go be coaches. They could go, stay in athletics. They could go be broadcasters. Those are sort of the natural fits. The interesting thing for me is where you see pro athletes go in the nonprofit world or not-for-profit world. That's where you see their life story coming in.
Okay.
And when they're able to do that well and relate it to, like for instance, I did a book for a former Pittsburgh Steeler, one of the first books I did for a professional athlete. He had a tremendous amount of adversity through his, through his growing up years. Really did not stand a chance to be a pro player, to be honest. You and I would have heard what happened to him, and not just like hard stuff, like you just didn't think, you wouldn't put it together and say he's going to be a pro athlete. You would have thought, maybe he'll do this. Maybe he was a farmer, he grew up on a farm, all this stuff. And he became a pro football player. Now that was a starter for 8 years, played for the Steelers. Fascinating story. And he immediately, when we did his book, because we had to go back through distilled sort of his life experience and wrote his book, which was really largely just a memoir about his whole journey of life. He immediately had these transcendent threads through that book that has launched his next, he's been out of the league for 25, 30 years now.
Oh, wow.
Launched his sort of second act of his career.
Cool.
And I always love when I see a pro athlete, they go and they start a business. It doesn't have to be a nonprofit. That was a little bit of a cliche. It doesn't have to be a nonprofit. It can be a business.
Yeah.
A for-profit business. But they start something else that's not sort of this obvious tie-in to athletics, to their sport or something related to athletics. It's this thing over here, and you go, oh, that's interesting that they did that. And you realize they had this thread through their life that they'd been interested in that all along. They'd been sort of going toward that all along. That's when you realize, oh, there's power in that transcendent thread that goes through their whole life.
That's super cool. Well, look, we got to pick a date. I want to do something with you here at the studios with people, let them come in and spend a day with you. I think it's powerful. I think DISTILL, we're about to launch DISTILL on LeaderPass, and it's going to be the first opportunity anybody's ever really had to go through your session online. And I think it's equally as impactful, especially if they follow your guide, because you're very clear about here's your time limit. We've created playbooks and workbooks for people to take notes and to go back through in the list that they have to make. And then I'm excited to get back in the studio with you to create that second part of it, which is going to be able to help those who want to go to the next level. So, awesome. But we appreciate you being here and love having you. It's great knowing you and excited about the future.
Yeah, thank you, man.
All right, bye-bye.
See you.